Welcome, y'all, to the Trinitarian Church podcast. I have with me Kaylin York and Alex Mogadam, and we are talking about Proverbs 25 today. We're continuing our march through Proverbs, which I've loved, y'all. I love going through Proverbs. I love seeing how it builds on itself. The complexity seems to increase as we keep going through the book. It's fantastic. I think some of the verses we want to touch on from chapter 25 really illustrate that point. So, Kaylin, why don't you start us off? What was the verse that stuck out to you?
Sure. It was verses 21 and 22 that states, "If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you."
All right, why'd that stick out to you, Kaylin? How does that apply to you?
I've always, I think, kind of latched on to the message of Christ and taking care of those people who are in your life, including your enemies. I've always kind of, for better or worse, feel like I've given people the benefit of the doubt, even maybe when you shouldn't, and just empathy in a lot of different ways really resonates with me. Both in what I do in my personal life and at work. Unfortunately, sometimes I'm much better at it at work than I am at home. But this idea of caring for someone who is not someone you love at home, but an enemy, in whatever arena of your life that is, but an enemy, you should feed them, you should give them something to drink, which kind of alludes to care for them, give them shelter, don't harm them, despite the fact they may want to harm you. And in doing so, you kind of heap these burning coals, or there's different ways you can interpret that, and the weight of their embarrassment of the things they think about you, and now you're treating them in such a positive way, like a human being, and it's just this, oh my gosh, what am I doing kind of a thing, kind of the, kill them with kindness, so to speak. So that's kind of the gist of that.
Yeah, and to go to what Kaylin's saying, there's a couple interpretations of this particular verse in the context of it. Because some people will say heaping burning coals. The idea of carrying burning coals on your head to light a fire was actually a pleasant experience because it was warm for people that usually were starting a fire because it was cold out. And so this is actually, if you're kind to people, then, you're going to bless them through the burning coals being on their head. That's one interpretation I've heard from legitimate scholars. The other interpretation is that it's burning coals on your head, and that's bad, and that people don't like burning coals on their head. I've always been a little confused about that, but I use this verse all the time now because, especially as I've gone deeper into pastoral counseling, one of the things I realize is that people really hate themselves. That people just really do not like themselves. And if you show them the love of God, if you show them God's love, then oftentimes that repels people. That creates a lot of cognitive dissonance within them. And that's how I interpret it now. Like you're saying, Kaylin, kill them with kindness. That when you are kind, you are genuinely kind. You're not trying to manipulate, especially if that other person is manipulative, they're not going to want to be around you. They're not going to want to do that because you're creating a lot of cognitive dissonance in them. And that's, what it's talking about with the burning coals. Alex, how do you read this verse or these verses?
Well, I like the way Kaylin put it. I think that's a better approach than the one I took. I could tell I took the sinner's version. Burning coals on the head. That'll show them. You know what I mean? That's the way I took it. I think it's so interesting that this particular verse is in the Old Testament because I'm curious to know how they define enemy here, because I know the enemies of God in the Old Testament were met with fury and a lot of sword play. And here he's saying, no, if you see your enemy and he's hungry, you want to give him something to eat. That's radically different than wipe out all of the Jebusites. Those are your enemies. And so you see this contrast here, and it brings to mind that God's ways are most certainly not our ways. His thoughts are just so much higher. And I think about how in the New Testament, sometimes, a fancy preacher will come along and he'll use the word paradoxal, which is kind of fun. But it is somewhat of a paradox. You see how God works. I'm telling you that the weapons of this world will fail. I'm telling you the weapons of everything that you've grown up to understand and know about. I'm giving you unconventional means to fight this battle. And I do think that it puts the follower of God in this precarious position, trying to figure out, how am I going to do this in this day and age? If I'm being honest, my enemies, I don't like them. I don't care for them. I know that they don't like me. I know that they don't care for me. And yet you see this contrast. This is how great love is supposed to be, I believe. It goes beyond just loving our brothers and sisters. It goes right into that divine heart where God puts rain on both the unrighteous as well as the righteous. And I believe the expectation is for us as well when it comes to reflecting his light, glory, and even his love.
I feel like I've gotten to a place in life where I don't really consider, like when it says enemy there, like I know there are people that I think are kind of out to get me. Like they are trying to do things. They are hoping bad things happen to me. Yep, Alex is one of them. But it's fine. You do the podcast with me, so we're good. But I think I've gotten to that point in life where I don't really consider them an enemy, right? I think people have their own stuff that I'm going to trigger some people, right? Things in me, because sometimes that's because Jesus in me. Sometimes that's just because Craig screws things up, right? And I hurt people. Some of that's deserved. Okay, regardless, like I just don't feel like I look at anyone that way. I say, okay, Alex is trying to destroy me, but you know what? That's between him and God. And I feel like I've gotten to the place in life where I'm kind of just fine with that. It's really about, okay, how do I feel towards Alex? How do I want to treat him, regardless of how he treats me? And I think that feeds into this verse. This verse is part of the reason I approach it that way. Because I say, even if this person is out to get me, the best thing I can do is just unconditionally love them. That's the thing that's going to change the dynamic. That's the thing that's going to potentially, like Abraham Lincoln said, I'm paraphrasing here, but if I make my enemy my friend, haven't I vanquished my enemy?
Hmm.
And that idea of, okay, like if we're going to have that breakthrough, it's going to be because I show them God's love, not because I outmaneuvered them. I've never outmaneuvered anybody. So I'm just going to keep pressing into God and let him do what he does. So the next verse we've got here, Alex, what was the verse that stuck out to you?
Well, I really enjoy all of these verses. I think that
you have to pick a favorite.
That's
of
probably
the Bible,
the PC way
discard the rest.
to take it. Yeah, to take it there. Once I picked this passage out of context, I really enjoyed it. It was verse 14. I really enjoyed this passage because I don't think every now and again, the Bible being living and active, the word will hit you in a different way than it has before. And I'm confident I've read this before, but this time along, I really took note. Verse 14 says, like clouds and wind without rain is the one who boasts of gifts never given. And off air, we had a little powwow debate on this one to see what this might mean. And for me, anyways, I came away with, I see this in our leadership structure today. I think everybody is rushing to a pulpit. Everybody wants to cut line, so to speak, and get into a paid ministry position. Like that's the goal of Christianity, sort of. And I don't say that to be disparaging. I know that it's a good thing to get our young leaders in there. I believe these things. But if they are not ones with gifts, and if you can't recognize these gifts in them, I think it's unwise that we have placed a lot of folks, in my estimation, my understanding of things, we have put a lot of people in a position to be cloud and winds without any rain, meaning they got the position, but they do not have the substance to carry out that position. And leadership is no joke. If you can preach, I think that's great. That does not equate to leadership. Knowledge and faith are two very different things. And I truly believe that any pastor, preacher, teacher, their job is to take everybody around them and to raise their level of faith until we all reach a unity in faith, thereby creating equality, thereby creating this beautiful spiritual unity. But for me, for example, or Craig is a good example, I suppose we could use big words to impress. I have a couple on deck. I try not to use them because what I have found is that I don't need to teach anyone Greek. I do not need to teach someone how to parse out a sentence in Hebrew and show them the different verbiage. I just don't need to do it. What I need to do is to remind them to hold on to the gospel belief. Yep. Jesus is Lord. When you die, you will be accused by Satan, but he will have no bite because you cannot carry accusation in front of perfect blood. This is the gospel message, not a big house and all that other stuff. And I think if we hold on to that and we have leaders that say, I'm going to invest in preaching Jesus and the gospel, you will build that substance. We won't have a bunch of clouds without rain. We'll actually produce. And I think that's what this passage is saying. But that's, again, that's my convoluted, look into that.
Yeah, it took me a minute to kind of chew this verse a little bit and kind of figure out the meaning of it. But I'm on a similar page to you. I think in the church especially, you see this polarization of people that are either like, I'm not gifted, I have no gifts, and this woe is me kind of take, or I'm the healer, I'm healing people. I'm teaching them and discipling them, so stay out of my way. And that arrogance. And you tend to just find very few people in the middle who are really, like you're talking about, Alex, paying attention to the gospel and saying, okay, you know what the gospel is, that we are weak, he is strong, right? If we humble ourselves before him, then God does stuff through us and with us, but we don't ever do anything ourselves. And that includes condemning ourselves. That includes bragging about ourselves. We don't do either. Those are the extremes we want to stay away from. Kalen, what's been your experience with this?
I think as we kind of looked at this verse 14 a little bit, what came to mind, you don't have to worry about big words with this. It's not very eloquent, but what I thought about was what I'm seeing here is a lot of hot air. That first verse, like clouds and wind without rain, as a man who boasts of a gift he does not give. Sounds like a lot of hot air to me. And I'm certainly, there's plenty of times in my life I've not been a model Christian or even professing to be a Christian. But man, I've seen a lot of people in the church, whether they're, average Joe in the pew or up on stage talking to people. I've seen a lot of people with hot air. We all have. They may not think that they have hot air or that their hot air is a great gift from God in and of itself, but there's not a lot of. It's an empty gift that's not nourishing or satisfying or redeeming. Not that we don't redeem, but our words can really heal people with the Lord working through us. And I've seen a lot of the hot air blowing about, if you will. So that's kind of where my mind went with that.
Yeah, and not to step into the stereotype that Alex has talked about with me, but, wind there is ruach. That is the Hebrew word. You're welcome, Alex. It's an important Hebrew word.
Hakodesh ruach. just so we do it properly, it's Hakodesh ruach.
All right,
it's not just ruach. Because if ruach, that's just spirit. Hakodesh, that just says, hey, we're talking about the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, okay, but we're not talking about the Holy Spirit here. We're talking about that Old Testament idea of wind, breath of life, and spirit, and the Holy Spirit. It's all using the same word, right? Those concepts are interconnected. And so this idea in this verse is talking about that there's spirit there, similar to what Kalen's talking about. There's spirit there, but it's not spirit with efficacy. They're not tapped into the actual spirit. And that's I'm not going to go into the water metaphor here because Alex is going to make fun of me. But but still, I think there's just something really powerful there about if we're doing things of our own spirit, of who we are, it's just a lot of hot air, right? There's very little substance to who we are. Our glory, our kavod, if you will, Alex, has no heaviness, has no weightiness to it. And so I'm glad I fit exactly into Alex's caricature of me, but hopefully, my kavod consists of the ruach of the Spirit of God Himself. So, all right. Thank y'all for those of you out there who put up with us. We appreciate it. Any grace is needed because that is the gospel. Is that we're not doing anything here perfectly. We're just wandering through the Bible, trying to see what God has for us. And we would encourage you to do the same. Every step towards Him is not wasted, and He's going to use that. So blessings on y'all. Hope you have a fantastic day. Have a good one.